All righty. Welcome all. Can everybody hear me loud and clear?
Yes.
Awesome. How is everybody today?
Good.
Having an excellent week? Are we enjoying the spring weather yet?
No.
It's lovely.
Yeah, me neither. It
Warm.
stinks.
Still feels like winter.
Yes, it does. It's amazing. Okay, so we're still waiting on a few people, but we don't have time to wait around for them any longer. A reminder, we start at 7:45 sharp and meeting once a week. We got a lot to cover in the time we have to actually meet. So it is imperative that everybody is here ready to go right at 7:45. Okay, I will take attendance in a moment. I'm going to give people a chance to come in, but I'm going to move on with the business of the class. So in a moment, I'm going to put up the, or I'm going to ask about the midterm in terms of questions. But so here's what we need to do today, given that Job is one of the big questions on the exam. So, so some of the key things we want to hit on here. Number one, we're going to cover the book of Job today. Let me make a note about next week. We're going to start Homer's Odyssey, and the homework assignment is to start reading books 1 through 4. I know you've got the exam. At the very least, you really want to get through the first 2 books. Let me tell you, Homer's Odyssey is going to be a really nice change of pace from the Bible. And I think probably everyone is excited to move on from the Bible at this point. Well, some people really get into it, but I think even if you like it, you're kind of ready for a change of pace. Homer's Odyssey is an awesome book. It's very often considered the first novel, despite the fact that Homer never would have called it that. But looking back at it today, it's very often taken as the kind of precedent for it. And the one thing great about Homer compared to the Bible is that it's actually an easy and fun read. That doesn't mean it's not a sophisticated text, but it reads in a much more straightforward manner. And of course, the Bible that we've been reading is the King James edition from the 17th century, with all the challenges of 17th century English and 17th century English diction, right? So it's going to be fun. And we're really going to focus in on the character of Odysseus. The Odyssey basically means the story, or sometimes you could say the journey, the story of Odysseus. It's as simple as that. And so Odysseus, the heroic main character, the protagonist, is really our focus. And he's a very interesting character who goes through all types of twists and turns and plights and trials and tribulations as described in the story. And there's some really interesting parallels to Job, despite the fact that one story is a biblical story coming out of the ancient Near East, and the other story is a Greek story coming out of ancient Greece. So that will be for next week. Today, some things we want to talk about really carefully in terms of themes that are going to be relevant for your understanding and also for the exam. Job's substance. And you'll notice in the first few verses of this text, it refers to Job's substance. And what we're really talking about here is what kind of guy is Job, both in terms of what does he have and what is he? And this word substance is used very clearly and very carefully to have a kind of dual meaning, right? We're going to talk about this idea of the inner versus the outer human being, or man as it was once called, but human being. And the distinction between who you are and what you have. Who you are and what you have. And the distinction between who you are and what you have is not a very clear one, as the story is going to illustrate. And Job's substance has everything to do with what really matters to Job, what's most important, right? We want to talk a little bit about the setting. We want to clarify this statement that really initiates everything that happens to Job. We all know that a couple characters get together in a certain place, a certain setting, And one of them says, does Job fear God for naught? Or to translate it into English, does Job fear God for nothing? Does Job fear God for nothing? And this is a kind of rhetorical question. And typically a rhetorical question is one that's actually a statement in the form of a question, right? And what this rhetorical question really means really involves some very important unpacking. And I think you get a sense of what you think it means, but you really have to take it apart to understand what it means. And why is that important? Because this rhetorical question is what initiates everything happening to Job. Particularly, it's a statement made by one character to another, and understanding its meaning, it helps explain why the other character who is receiving this question does what he does, right? We want to talk about briefly Job's lament. Once he's made to suffer in this, what seems to be a gratuitous and arbitrary way, he gives this beautiful lament. And it's really more like a poem, right? And what's so fascinating about the poetic nature of his lament in chapter 4 is that it has all these wonderful echoes and resonances of God's creation and echoes of Genesis. Then there are all these back and forth dialogues between Job and his friends about what's really going on with him and what he's really done to deserve or not deserve what's happening to him. And then at the very end, God intervenes and one character poses many rhetorical questions to Job and his friends. And here I've got a picture of Job and his friends. Obviously, Job being the shirtless one and his wife next to him, and then his three friends who have come to sit with him in his time of grief and suffering and trials and tribulations. And God comes in and says some very interesting things. And the question is, what is he saying? Why is he saying it? What does it really mean for Job and his friends? Okay, so let me take attendance, and then I'll come to the midterm. Felicia, is Felicia here? Yes. How you doing, Felicia? Got it, Felicia. Also, if you have your books, please let me know. Many people had their books last week. Some people don't. Is Czar here? No. What about Gianna? No. Karen. Is Karen Chen here?
Hi, Professor.
How are you?
Good.
And Thomas.
I'm here.
How are you, Thomas?
I'm good, thank you.
And Jan.
Here.
How are you?
I'm good, thank
Renee?
you.
No. Ariba.
I'm here, Professor.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Nisha.
Yes, Professor, I'm here.
You're here. And Clement is here. Fahim
Here.
is here. Delavan. No. Faye.
Here.
How are you?
Good.
And
thank you.
Sachin.
I'm here.
How are you? And Kevin?
Thank you.
No. Anastasia is here. How are you? Alexander, well, his iPhone is here. I don't know if he's here. How are you? Nada is here. How are you? Angelica.
I am here.
How are you, Angelica?
Good, how are you?
Great. And Michael. Is Michael Ruffini here? No. And Kazi. Is Kazi here?
Yep, I'm here.
How are you, Kazi?
Good.
And Rosemary.
Here.
How are you? And Brian. Alexander, you don't actually need to change your last name. It's okay. It's just funny.
Oh, okay.
No, Brian. I mean, I know who it is. Carlos is here. Natalie is
Yeah, here.
here. Vicky is here, correct? Yes. How are
Yes,
you, Vicky?
here.
And Ashley is here. Let me just make a couple remarks. Some of you have done really excellently for attendance. That's great. And Natalie, you've got your books. Got it. And Ashley. Okay, got it. And Nisha. G. Got it, Nisha. And Clement. Oh, you guys got to tell me when I call on you. Okay. All right. Anyone else who happens to have your books, just email. All right, Karen, you're the last one, Karen. We got to move on here. Got it. Anyone else have their books? Just send me an email. If there's anyone who sent some emails and I haven't gotten to you, I'm in the process of doing it. If you happen to have some emergency and I haven't gotten back to you about it, don't worry. Let me make a general rule of thumb. I never punish students for things that are on me. Like, let's say I were to post an assignment late and you really didn't have enough time to get it in the normal due date. I would not say you must have it in at that due date. And then when everybody doesn't because they couldn't do it, I penalize them all. I would never do something like that. So if there's ever a situation where you've got an urgent message to me and I haven't gotten it like in a reasonable amount of time, I'm never going to punish you for the fact that I was a little slow in getting to it. So just know that if you happen to have a message sitting there. Okay, next thing, all recordings of the class will be up on YouTube. I got them all up this week for the last 2 weeks, but I'm not going to post links to Blackboard anymore. They'll just be sitting on YouTube. And what I will do is post a link for my YouTube channel in the Blackboard menu, right? So that way, I mean, you can just click and scroll through or whatever you have to, whatever you're looking at, however the format comes up, and you'll find everything will be there. And it's probably simpler than going through Blackboard anyway. Okay, the exam. Do students have questions about the exam? Anybody have any questions about the exam? So I've provided 2 videos explaining the exam. So here it is. I can make a few general remarks, but other than that, so questions. Jan, let's start with you.
Hi, I just had a quick question. Do you want us, because there's like multiple parts to the question, do you want us to like number each like response or each answer,
Okay,
like how we do
good
discussion
question.
boards?
So I would use these questions as an outline for you in answering the questions. But the final answer on the test that you turn into me on Turnitin, it should have the entire question at the beginning and then your entire continuous uninterrupted answer after that for each. Does that make sense?
Yeah, got it. So just the first question and then full response.
Yes, but
Okay.
obviously when you're doing the actual test and you're doing like a draft of it, I think it's very convenient to use the questions as an outline. And then let me just state the obvious. All parts of the question need to be answered. Given that you've got roughly 1.5 to 2 pages in answering, you might just decide to have emphasized one part of the question more than another, just based on your own understanding, your own interest, so on and so forth. But you want to make sure to answer every part. Obviously, not everybody's going to answer each part with the same amount of length. So that's up to you. Natalie.
I just had a
Question.
question regarding the second portion. I believe it's the book of Job.
Yes.
On the first question, which is A, you're asking us to compare it with Augustine's distinction between city of man and city of God. Were we given that reading?
Pardon?
Were we given that reading, or
We're
are we
going to
just
talk
going on
about
our
it
own?
today, and it's in the PowerPoint, and it's in the lecture videos that I've provided. We're going to talk about that today.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Good question. Other questions? Let me just make good. Let me just make one little statement about substance of your exam, and then one little statement about business matters connected. So what I'm looking for is the most specific answer you can possibly give to these questions. You must draw on the text directly and as much as possible. There's something called, it's a kind of generic term really, a close reading. And what it means is when you're asked about the text, that the answer you give is very close to the substance and to the language of the text itself, as opposed to being a very broad generalization, right? So the facts and the language of the text should be very specifically referenced in your answers. Now that I've said that, let me back up. Each part of these answers, like let's just take B right here. You know, I'm asking you what this means. Skin for skin, all that a man hath, he will give for his life, right? I'm asking, you know, part of what I'm asking here is what the heck does that mean? What does it mean? And obviously, the first couple sentences you give in response to what does that statement mean are going to be broad and overarching. They're going to be like a thesis statement, a kind of general statement about what it means. But then you're going to go on to support with greater levels of specificity drawn from the text, right? So let me come back to emphasize this point. If I ask you, you know, part C, question, what does it mean when Satan says, does Job fear God for nothing? Right? You're going to give an answer, and then you're going to support that answer. And there's two things you're going to use to support that answer. Number one is direct information from the text, maybe even a verbatim quotation or a paraphrase, right? The next thing is just the use of your own reasoning, making inferences from the text. So it's just, how do you support any claim you make? On one hand, you have evidence, and on the other hand, you have your own logic. Evidence means you take facts that you can present publicly to other people, and logic means you take the facts you have and reach conclusions, logical conclusions from those facts, right? So in some cases, there's a general meaning to things that is, you know, it's either correct or it's incorrect, right? On the other hand, some of these questions are more open-ended and involve your interpretation, your understanding, and your opinion. And I'm not looking for my understanding of the text to simply be replicated in the test and you to parrot what I say, but rather you have an opinion, and the quality of your answer is dependent on how well you support that opinion. Maybe you make an interpretation about something involved with Genesis or the meaning of the fruit, and I don't totally agree with you. Well, guess what? I don't care. What I want to see from you is the reasoning behind why you believe your opinion is correct, and to support it with evidence from the text and logical conclusions drawn from the text, and so on and so forth. Because many students will ask me, well, interpreting literature is kind of subjective. And my answer is, I don't totally disagree with you. However, if you, for example, were to say something that was contrary to literally what was in the text, right, then you'd just be wrong, right? So any text creates a kind of playing field or a set of boundaries within which you're forced to operate in terms of how you understand its meaning. There is something subjective to interpretation, but it's certainly not 100% subjective. It's much, there's much less wiggle room than you might think. And what I want to see is your thinking about how you answer these questions. In particular, you should not be, it's in the videos and it's on here. You should not be using any sources, secondary, secondhand interpretive sources at all for this exam. This is not a research paper. This is your critical thinking about these questions based on your understanding of the reading. So the only secondary source that you should be using here, for example, is Cass's The Beginnings of Wisdom, right? Outside that, you should not be using any other sources than what has been provided you in the class. If it were a research paper where you would go and get other sources and read them, and that would be a different type of exam altogether. It'd be a research paper, which this is not. Any other questions about the exam? Angelica.
It's a follow-up question and I haven't seen the video. So if it's in the video, then let me know that. But someone asked earlier about the question. So technically it's 2 questions, but when you break it down, it's 6 questions. So are we doing 1A, 1B, 1C, or you want to just do 1 and then just go 1?
You answer everything.
Okay.
Now, what did I say? I said you might decide to dwell on one part of the question more than another, right? Perhaps one question strikes you as more intelligible or more interesting, but you need to answer all the parts of the question.
Got it. And we need to do like 1A and put that whole question, like the whole statement, what kind of meant, because technically 2, it's like, it's kind of like a statement and then there's 3 questions after that, right? For the second one. That's
Yeah, so the questions really come in the letters.
Yeah, okay. Got it.
I'm sorry,
The
Professor.
statement is just trying to kind of frame your understanding of things.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm a little confused. So let's say question 1, which is regarding Genesis and the creation of Earth. We're answering A, B, C, D in that 1.5 and 2-page paper, and then we are also answering the set question 2, which is the Book of Job, A, B, C.
That's correct.
Oh. Okay. Thank you.
This has been up for a long time. People had a
No,
lot
I
of
know. I
opportunity.
just thought you meant answer one of these for, elaborate on that. Like if I chose A, compare and contrast the meaning of the fruit and fire, I would elaborate on A only within
Well,
that
all
one.
right. So
That's what I understood. I'm sorry. I didn't
Okay.
realize that we were answering A, B, C, and D within
Okay,
these
well,
essays.
yeah. Well, one thing is that particularly, I mean, the questions tend to overlap with one another. They're not the content, the things that you're going to start talking about are connected from one thing to the next thing. So for example, as you start to answer things relative to part A, you're automatically starting to address things that are being asked in part B and so on and so forth.
And just to be clear, because I know some professors take off points for how we label our document. You specifically put it here where it says we put our name. So like, let's say I'll put Natalie Wolf, Tuesday, 7:45 / midterm, or just Natalie Wolf, Tuesday, 7:45.
As long as I know it's yours, you put your name, you put CMP 2800 and you load it up on Turnitin. I'm not going to take points off for stuff like that as long as I know it's yours and you're the one who's loaded it in there. So it's going to be clear.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, so we should turn to Job and start addressing Job and focus on things that are going to be relevant for the exam. Let me just mention a few things. So the Book of Job comes from the last part of what's called the Tanakh. And the Tanakh consists of the Torah, the Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. And they're the three primary books of the Hebrew Bible, which we often call the Old Testament, which is virtually identical. And the book of Job comes from the last portions of writing, and it's a much more modern text than, for example, Genesis. It comes from at least about 600 years later, and was written during the period of what's called the Babylonian captivity in around the 5th century BC, when all the Jews of Israel were basically taken captive and brought to Babylon, right? It was at this time that the Bible comes into its final edited form. Remember, the Bible, the Tanakh, is an anthology, really. It's a whole series of writings that come from different sources written over about a 1,000-year period. These stories go back that much further. Modern biblical scholars, textual scholars, have identified 4 different editors who have kind of compiled this text historically. And it's the period during the Babylonian captivity that this text comes into its final form. And why is that so crucial? Because in the ancient world, there were really 2.5, 3 things that identify who you are as a human being. There's the family you come from, there's the gods you pray to, and there's the land you live on and your relationship with it. The land of your fathers and forefathers. So the Jews, being displaced from their own homeland, are displaced from their ancestral homes, right? Through this thing that's very often called the diaspora, this kind of dispersal of the people. So it's at this point, around 500 BC, when this story of Job comes into its final form, that the Jews really become the people of the book, because the thing that holds their identity together is now not living in a geographical homeland. It's having the book to unite them and to provide guidance for who they are and how they should live. It's also particularly pertinent that in the ancient world, when things good happen to you or when bad things happen to you, it's the result of some form of divine intervention, right? And the Jews were in deep search of an explanation as to why God had done this to them as a nation during the period of the Babylonian captivity. A faithful people essentially seemed to be being punished by God. And there's a fascinating parallel between this story of Job, a good man who seems to be punished for reasons that are utterly inexplicable, a parallel to what they were actually going through as a people at large. And it raises these basic questions about why God would punish his chosen people, and questions like the origins of evil, right? If God is all powerful and all good, why would he ever do this to the people who have maintained their covenant, maintained their faith with him? Difficult question. I want to skip over that one. And I'm going to go down to right here. Because Job comes from a much later period of time than Genesis, it has a very different structure that's really apparent. One of the things you notice about the structure is it really reads like a modern short story. You get a kind of introduction or a kind of prologue in which the setting is laid out, in which the characters are laid out. Then you get the identification of the conflict and the problem. And then you see all the rest of the story deals with the ramifications of the conflict in Job's life and the dialogue with the friends. And then at the very end, this intervention by God, bringing resolution to the initial conflict, right? It uses diegesis and mimesis, if anybody remembers these terms from the beginning of the semester, which is to say narration and dialogue. And it uses it in a way that's very modern. It's very little distinct from any short story or novel that you would read today in terms of its combination of these two styles of use. Whereas in Genesis, the distinction between diegesis and mimesis, which is to say dialogue versus narration, is not very clear and not very clearly indicated in the text. Okay. There's one very interesting thing about the structure of the plot. It's U-shaped, which is to say things start out very good for Job, they get very bad, and what happens at the end? Is it a happy ending or a sad ending, despite all the trauma and suffering that Job has experienced?
It's a happy ending.
It's a happy ending. This is one of the weirdest things about this story. It has a happy ending after all this. And so let's put it this way. When Job suffers, what basically happens to him? What is done to him in a general way? What's done to him? If you had to say one sentence, what Satan does to him, what would you say?
He destroys him.
He destroys him, sure. Can we be a little more specific? Absolutely. Can we be a little more specific? He does what to Job? He blank, one sentence.
He takes all of his belongings away.
Yes, yes. He takes all of his belongings, except for, I think that's great. He takes everything away from Job. He takes his children. Well, I'll shut up. What does he take from Job? What does Satan take from Job?
His animals, his servants.
Yeah, so his cattle, right, which is both food, but also it's representative of his wealth. I'm sorry, keep going, Natalie.
His servants. I believe
His
it said
servants,
his
good.
oxen, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, sure, all those cattle.
His children, most
His
importantly.
children, absolutely.
He let him keep his wife.
Yeah, good. Job wasn't so lucky. He'd probably been better off without her, given what she says there. Do you remember? Does anyone remember what the wife says after the second time Satan takes everything away? The wife turns to Job and says, "Curse God and die." She's not very happy with Job because all the things that mattered to her are gone. Takes his children, leaves his wife who's not happy with him. So that's like not a plus. What else does Satan take?
His health.
Okay, good. Gives him like boils on his skin, right? Skin for skin, all that a man hath, he will give for his life. Which means he disfigures him. What else does he take from Job?
His house.
Yes, his house. Very good. Let me ask this. So he takes his children away. He takes his house and all his wealth away. He takes almost all of the things that really matter to Job. He takes them away. Anything a little less material he takes from Job. Something that's intangible that at least he tries to take from Job. Angelica.
Well, he tries to take like his faith away.
Okay, we'll come to that one. That's the one I want to hold off on.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point. We're going there. We are headed in that direction, but not quite yet.
I feel like it took his reputation away.
Thank you. Very good. So intangible. And that's very clear with the way his wife reacts to him. She's not just married to a good man. Well, let's answer this question now. if Job is a man of substance, what is the substance he has? He actually has two kinds of substance.
It's like material substance. I mean, there's a better word for it. It's
Okay,
just-
no, perfect. Wealth, material well-being,
Mhm.
substance, like literally stuff, right? What other kind of substance does he have? He's a man of substance. What do we mean when we call someone a man or a woman of real substance? Are we talking about their wealth?
No, I thought it was like his similar. I don't want to say his reputation, but like he carried like a good. Sorry, I'm really bad with
Yeah,
words.
reputation is a problematic one because it has to do with what he's reputed for. We'll come back to reputation in just a second. What if he's a man of substance and we're not talking about material things, tangible things, external goods? What kind of substance does he have that's less tangible beside his reputation and beside his bling, his stuff?
It was like more like his character, like who he
Yes.
is as a person.
Full stop. His character. And when we say character, what we mean is moral character, right? His moral fiber. And when you say someone has good character or character, it means they are a righteous human being, right? They act with moral virtue, right? Moral excellence. They carry themselves in the proper way relative to other people and maybe other things. Job has two kinds of reputation. He has a reputation for being a very successful and wealthy man who's got a lot of stuff that people admire. But then he's got also a reputation for being upright, righteous, God-fearing, right? And what's interesting about his wife's reaction, right, is that when all the stuff is taken, she says, curse God and die. She's upset about the worldly well-being that Job has amassed and that she no longer has access to it. So the reputation thing can cut both ways. And obviously his reputation in general to the ordinary person must be significantly hampered by what has been happening to him, because all the reputation based on his material well-being is gone. And it's amazing. Well, these friends and how they treat him is a big question. What kind of, are these real friends? What kind of friends are they? Okay, so we've talked about everything. We're still talking about this U-shaped plot for a second. It starts at the top. Job's got a lot of stuff, reputation, wealth. It goes to the bottom here because Satan takes stuff away. Does Satan take everything away from Job?
No.
Absolutely. Very important answer. The answer is no. What are 2 or 3 really fundamental things that Satan does not take from Job?
His life.
Okay, this is really important. God says to Satan up in heaven or wherever they are, he says, you see my servant Job down there? He's the most righteous of them all. You know what? Because of what you said to me, does Job fear God for naught? I'm going to let you take everything from Job. But the one thing you can't take is his life, right? You can't kill him, right? And okay, so Job has his life. That's not taken from him. Is there anything else that Satan can't take from Job, or doesn't can't?
His faith.
Yeah, so there's this question of the type of man Job is, right? And so this text conceives of moral character or moral virtue in terms of faith and fear of God. To be a righteous human being in the world of Job is to fear God, have faith in God, maintain one's faith in God, right? And of course, what is Satan's wager? He says, God, your servant ain't all that great. And I'm going to prove it to you. Because when I take all the stuff that he likes, all the cattle and the house and the children, right? And I'm going to leave him his rotten wife. When I do all this, he's going to curse you to your face. And you're going to see that he's not really a man of faith. He just appears to be. So this is the catch with reputation. Reputation is a kind of appearance to other people. Maybe even, and of course you can't, it's a little different with God because you can't fake it with God. You might be able to fake it with other people. Actually, if you were to talk about the literary genre of this text, it would not be a tragedy. Does anyone know how Greek tragedies always end? How do Greek tragedies always end?
With death or murder?
Not necessarily. But you're on the right track. Actually, they want to even make it worse for the tragic figure. They want to leave them alive because it's even more miserable to be alive and miserable than
Like
dead. 'Cause
suffering.
when you're dead, you don't have to feel misery anymore. You get put out of your misery. How do tragedies end?
Does it end with suffering and torture?
Of a certain type. Yeah, let's sum up. Tragedy always ends poorly. It always ends badly for the tragic figure. There is no redemption, right? Job, on the other hand, suffers grievously. Our common sense understanding of tragedy, rather than like the technical genre of it, defined by like Aristotle or something, right? We would think this is a kind of tragic story. But the irony is, because it ends well, technically, if you were a Greek, you would call this a comedy. And a comedy is, there's a famous comic play by Shakespeare called All's Well That Ends Well, right? So a comedy is one where all's well that ends well. And this one, how well does Job do in the very end? Did anyone
everything
catch
back.
that? I'm sorry.
He got most everything back. I mean, he got his
He got
children
most
back.
everything back. Anyone want to clarify? I agree, but did anyone catch exactly how much he got back?
I know he had new children.
He got more land than he had before too.
He got even more than what he had at the beginning. So God is like a banker or something. He takes it from you, and then when he returns it with interest, right? Because he took it from you, and he's like paying you back for the time that you had it taken from you. So Job actually gets more back in the end than he had at the beginning. And then I think your question is like, well, what the hell was this all about to begin with? Right? I mean, is it just a game? Right? There's something very dark and disturbing about what happens to Job, and also the motivation as to why it happens. So let me just be very clear. A couple more kind of framing questions, and then we'll jump into the text. So the structure is very clear. There's a prologue in which the setting is established, the characters are established, conflict, and also the conflict starts to unfold. Action happens. But then you notice that the main substance of this text is actually this dialogue back and forth between Job and his friends. Let me ask this. What kind of friends are these people? Are they real friends, or are they just fair weather fans?
I think they're real friends because he was in need and they came.
So you're going on the premise of a friend in need is a friend indeed.
Yeah, I mean, but they didn't know what they were saying. I don't think that's like
This
their
is
fault.
true, and God at the end really lets them know, you brothers do not know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why, right?
Mhm.
So she says they are real friends, despite the fact that they don't know what they're talking about. That's a very interesting analysis. What do other people think? Are these just like fair weather friends? You know what that means. Like when things are going well for you, they're your best friends. But you know, there's that old blues song that Eric Clapton performed for MTV Unplugged. It's called "Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out," right? And Job is definitely down and out. And in a sense, he's kind of a nobody. Some of the major indicators that make him who he is, some major possessions that make him who he is, for most people, have been taken away. For his wife, for example, it's unacceptable what's been taken from him, right? And remember, not everything is gone. Other thoughts? Do people think these guys are real friends or no?
I think they are real friends. They stayed with him despite he lost his reputation.
Very good, right? He's obviously, if you just think of an average situation, like, okay, the story says Job is morally upright and righteous and he's pious and he goes makes sacrifices for his kids, even when he doesn't even know if they've done something wrong, to like, you know, put some credit in the account of like the sin account, just in case they've done something wrong. He's like, it's really ridiculous, almost like who the heck is really this good? Like, I don't know anybody like this. And if you think about the average person looking at this man and being, you know, knowing him, I think most people would say, whoa, Job is down and out, and I don't know this guy anymore. Who's that? Job? Never heard of him, right? Most people, I think, would you know, they'd go, no thank you. But these guys actually show up when Job is like a nobody. It's got nothing except for a few things, but from the average person's perspective, he really has nothing, right? And you might even say in a certain way he's kind of died, right? His status as a public figure, he's kind of dead because he doesn't have any of the markers of status that would give him the kind of typical reputation that would give him respect in a community. Because remember, at the beginning, it's clear that he's respected for two things. He's respected for his stuff, his family, all of which is taken away, but then he's also respected for who he is. But we can all wonder, what do other people typically care about more? So everybody agrees that these friends are like real friends. That's funny because most time when I teach this, people are split.
No, I think the same too. I think they were friends. I mean, I think they were all confused as to why things were happening. They were trying to like, I think they were trying to get like the truth out of him, even though there was no truth.
Sure. So we'll come to that in just a moment. So there's a great little, it must have been like 20 years ago when Donald Trump was on Hard Times, but he talked about like, he actually looked forward to a day where he was struggling in his own business to see who his friends really were, because he knew when he was doing well and he had a good reputation that everybody, quote, was his friend. But he wanted, when he struggled, he wanted to see who was going to come out of the woodwork and really be there. And it was sometime in the 1990s that he had a lot of business failures, like things went bankrupt and stuff like that. And he talks about discovering who his friends really were, and people who he thought were really his friends disappeared, and people he wasn't so sure about came out of the woodwork and said, hey, you know, let me help you out. So I think we can probably conclude that generally speaking, these guys are real friends. They've shown up when Job is literally a nobody, and they could turn their backs on him and walk away. And it would be, you might not agree with it, but it would be totally understandable in terms of how normal people act. Imagine if this happened to you. Think about all the people in your life and which ones of them would actually show up. And the reality would be, you probably would be surprised about who does show up and who doesn't. But there is a problem with the friends, right? What's the problem with the friends? Everything they say to him is kind of not quite right. What is their problem?
Seems like they're angry for him. Like
Yeah,
they
they're-
just have no faith in, they don't believe. Not that they don't believe in God, they just feel like he played him.
So they want to curse God on Job's behalf?
Not curse him. From what I got from it was that they were just trying to tell him, look, you were so loyal and he did this to you and you're still continuing to be loyal.
There's one thing you're missing here, and it's really important. Look, the friends look at Job. He's gotten everything taken away from him. And all three of them basically say versions of the same thing, right? They all recognize they believe God has done this to Job. And the key thing is they think they know why Job has had this done to him by God. They like Job enough to stay with him. They love Job enough to care about him. But what is their conclusion about Job's conduct based on the fact that they believe he's being made to suffer by God's hand himself?
I think it's because like the things that he was saying about himself, they were confused too. They was confused just like he was.
Wait, I don't think they were so confused. And actually, this is where they go wrong. They think they know what's going on with, remember, Job is sitting here lamenting, God, why have you done this to me? God, I wish I had never been born at all. Please put me out of my misery. And why do I want to never have been born at all? Because to have been born means to have one period where I had everything, like I won the lottery and then I had everything taken away from me, which is even worse than having never been born at all, because if you've never been born at all, you never have to go through any of that suffering. And he says, why is this happening to me, essentially? Well, he says that explicitly. And the friends say, come on, Job, we know. Why don't you just be straight with us? Why do the friends think Job is suffering?
Is it because of his kids?
No.
They think that he's punished for something, and if he's
Yes, they
punished,
think he's being punished for something. What is that something in general terms?
something bad what he's done, but he does not face it.
Yes. They all have slightly different things to say, but they all come to Job and say, come on, Job, it's time to come clean. Look at you. You've had everything taken away. We know God did this. You know God did this. You're complaining to him. Remember, Job does complain to God. Job does complain to God. There's just certain things he doesn't do. He does give God guff. And he says that the friends basically say, come on, it's time to come clean. The reason you're being made to suffer, we all know it. Come on, man. You did something wrong. Why don't you come clean and tell us what it is?
I guess that's the part where he started defending himself too.
Yeah, for good reason. So what did Job do wrong to deserve all this punishment?
Nothing.
Felicia says nothing. Come on, man. He gets all this punishment for nothing? What do other people think? What did Job do wrong to deserve all this punishment?
The only wrong thing he did was being like perfect, because if he was not perfect.
I mean, that's my problem with him. He's too perfect. I can't stand him for that. And it's very clear. There's one little interesting thing in this story. It's very clear that up to this point in Job's life, he's actually never really gone through any adversity before. It's implied by some of the things Satan says. And you're kind of like, man, you're due. Like, you're just too perfect, because I can't relate to you. So I agree with you that what's wrong with Job is that he's too good. but we can't technically say he's punished for that. Is there anything Job did that he deserves to be punished for? Felicia said no.
Yeah, I agree with her. I also think nothing.
Okay. So there is nothing that is made clear that that he's done anything wrong. And actually, when we look at the opening dialogue in just a moment, we're going to see between Satan and God, we're going to see that Job has not done anything wrong. And there's the question of, does he do anything wrong in the course of being made to suffer, which is another question. Is Job being punished?
Yes.
He's
I-
being punished.
I think he's being like tested.
Okay, well, there's a difference between being punished and being tested. I'm going to slide through some things here.
I think he's being punished. God is being tested.
Okay, so let's clarify some terms here. To be punished is to have, how should I put it? Negative measures as the consequence of wrongdoing. My child doesn't do the right thing, I put her in timeout. That's punishment. But we've all agreed that Job didn't do anything wrong. So technically, yes, he's made to suffer. But punishment specifically is a response to wrongdoing. It's the corrective measure to wrongdoing. It's the punitive measure to wrongdoing. We've all acknowledged he hasn't done anything wrong. So technically speaking, he's not being punished. What is happening to him then if he's not being punished?
He's suffering.
And why am I saying that? By the very logic of it, he hasn't done anything wrong for God to punish him for. Therefore, whatever's happening to him, while it looks like punishment, it can't be, technically speaking, punishment.
So God is basically testing him.
Okay, so you say he's testing. So let's just come back to it now that we've got this concept of testing on the one hand and punishment on the other. So obviously the friends, in all their dialogue back and forth with Job, they believe Job is being punished for sinning. Let's be just very blunt about it. They see him suffering. They say, oh, this suffering is obviously punishment. And if he's being punished by God, the logical inference is he's done something wrong. And Job keeps protesting his innocence. And instead of the friends believing him, they just put their arms together and say, it's time to come clean, Job. It's just, please stop with the innocence talk. It's, we can't possibly believe you. And here's the problem with the friends. They believe they understand the situation. They've used their own powers of reason and rational inference to make sense of what's happening to Job. And guess what? Their powers of reason turn out to be completely wrong. And this is a little moral that's going to be highlighted by God at the end about the limits of human reason in attempting to understand God and what he does. Because what we discover is that God's not punishing, he's testing, and the friends couldn't have possibly figured this out through their reason, because we could say God works in mysterious ways, especially when we look at his little interaction with Satan. So what does it mean to be tested here as opposed to punished? What is the wager? I mean, we've kind of already talked about it. We'll read right now, but what is the wager that Satan and God have made?
To see if he will still be faithful or a good person after the test or the trial.
Yeah, a trial is another great word, right? Or a test, which is to say, Satan makes a prediction about, I mean, these guys are like gambling, right? They've like gotten on, what is that football gambling site? I can't remember what it is. It made all the money. They gamble about what, Job's going to do. Is he going to when he is tested by having everything taken away, is he going to remain faithful to God? or is he going to curse God to his face, right? We'll answer that question in a moment. So it's a test, and Satan and Satan and God they kind of gamble with each other. They make a bet about what's going to happen with Job. Let me just go. Okay, good. So this part of the text is the prologue that lays out the situation, right? And a couple of things we want to answer in looking, I'm sorry, where did I have it? Right. Oh, here, good. All right, I want to ask the question of what is the setting? I want to ask about what is dramatic irony. I want a little bit about who Job is, particularly in terms of his substance, right? These first 4 questions that all relate to the exam. Could I have a volunteer read for us? I'll make this a little bit bigger. Who would like to read for us? Felicia, you want to read for us?
Sure.
Awesome.
There was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil.
And eschewed evil, like kept away, like shoo evil, like stay away from me. He kept it at bay. Okay. So Job is an upright man, right? He's morally righteous. And one of the interesting things about the Bible is the way in which a morally righteous man or human being is described. And here he's described as having fear of God. And it turns out in the Bible, both Old and New Testament, and if you're familiar, you know this, that fear of God is really synonymous with decency, because fear of God is connected with faith in God. When you're afraid of God, you do what God commands because you're too afraid to not do it. And this is really going to be important, because Satan at verse 9 is going to ask, does Job fear God for nothing? Well, part of this statement of does Job fear God, or the question, does Job fear God for nothing, is dependent on, first of all, does Job fear God? Yes or no? Does Job fear God?
He does.
Absolutely. There's no question about it, right? So that part of that rhetorical question is clarified. You want to keep going, Felicia?
And there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His substance also was 7,000 sheep, and 3,000 camels, and 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 she asses, and a very great household. So that this man was the greatest of all the men of the east. And his son went and feasted on their houses, every one his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat, to drink with them.
Okay,
And-
great. Let's pause for a second. So in verse 1, we get a clear indication of his moral substance, his moral fiber as a human being. He's an upright, perfect, righteous, God-fearing man of faith. Then at verse 3, it's very clear that the word substance is referring to his his wealth, his material wealth, right? And he's a great man, quote unquote, in 2 dimensions. So the very word great seems to connect in with this issue of reputation, right? And what would he be reputed for in public? For all this wealth, right? So here the substance refers to all this material well-being it has. So from verses 1 to then 2, 3, 4, you get a clear indication of these 2 halves of Job. Not only is he a righteous man but he's a wealthy man, which is a pretty rare combination. You want to keep going, Felicia?
And it was so, when the days of their feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning, and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, It may be that my sons have sinned, and cursed God in their hearts. Thus did Job continually. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them.
Okay, so this is the first time Satan ever appears in the Bible. And there's so much debate about exactly what kind of character he is. Is he the devil that, which is a concept that develops particularly in Christian theology? The word Satan means two related things in Hebrew. It's a Hebrew word, and it's not even a proper noun. So that it's even capitalized is a little bit unusual. But a Satan, rather than the Satan, is an accuser, an adversary of mankind. And how is he an adversary of mankind? He's the accuser of mankind. And Satan here is going to accuse Job of being a certain kind of man, that he really isn't what he's cracked up to be, right? He said, when you really turn the screws on Job, we're going to see who he really is. So here at 6, we get the introduction. We've had the introduction of Job and his family at 1 through 5. And here at 6, we get the introduction of Satan and the Lord. And then they're going to enter into their conversation, which I want to hold off on for just a couple minutes here. Where are Satan and the Lord, God?
I'm assuming heaven?
Yeah, and where is Job?
On earth?
Obviously. How many settings do we have?
2.
Yes, 2. And it's really crucial to have that in mind. What does Job do once he gets everything taken away by Satan? He asks the question, why? Well, look, guess what? The reader from the very beginning of the story knows why. Because the Lord and Satan got together on a Saturday afternoon and they were drinking a beer and they said, yo, did you see my servant Job down there? Well, let's make a bet. And Satan says, yeah, I guarantee you he'll curse you if I take everything away from him. And God says, yeah, go ahead and see what happens, right? The reader from the very outset of the story understands the conflict and the source of the conflict and the motive behind the conflict. And actually, the motive starts with God. With God. And Satan is also considered a type of a tempter, right? Just like the snake, the serpent is a tempter. And what's fascinating here is Satan doesn't just tempt Job as his adversary, he also tempts God. So this introduces a really important concept called dramatic irony. And dramatic irony is when the reader or observer of like a play knows a really important fact, a material fact about what's going on in the story, what's going on in the plot that the characters themselves are not aware of. And this happens all the time in tragedy, dramatic irony. Here, we're let into the dialogue on what's going on in heaven. And Job isn't. Job is just looking from the point of view of his earthly terrestrial perspective. And this is something we can all relate to. When bad things happen to us, really bad things, what do we ask? We ask, why is this happening to me? And in the real world, as opposed to a story, we very often don't get a very good answer to this question, right? Job's perspective is very realistic in the sense that he doesn't know why it's happening. Within the world of narrative, however, the reader gets to see why. And this is dramatic irony because the reader knows and Job doesn't. Before we get to that dialogue, I just want to briefly talk about this issue that was raised by Natalie of the city of man versus the city of God, right? This whole story has to do with presenting an image, the Bible presenting an image of what is the right kind of life as a believer in God or as a follower of God. How should one live? This is a question that is fundamental to the Bible. It's going to be a question that's fundamental to Homer as well. And it starts off in answering that question, how does one live, is answered by answering the question of what one is, right? And the ancient world in general sees the human being as a combination of body and soul. We've got a physical component and we have a psychological and spiritual component, which means we have an inner substance and an outer substance. We have a who we are from the psychological and spiritual and moral point of view. And then we have a what we are from all the things that we possess, including our body in this world, right? Remember what Satan does. He harms so there's an inner person and an outer person. What does Satan do? He harms all the outer substance of Job and literally the outer man by putting like boils and scars on his body. Remember when Satan says, skin for skin, all that a man hath, he will give for his life, right? The thing that Satan thinks is most precious to every human being is saving their skin. Has everyone heard that expression, saving their skin?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what does he think Job cares about most? His life, and not just physically being alive, but all the physical possessions, including his body and its own well-being, his health that come with that outer dimension of Job's substance, right? And of course, it turns out, contrary to Satan's thesis, that Job has an inner substance that Satan can't take away and he doesn't change, right? So this issue of inner and outer that the Bible presents, it creates a kind of thesis about what the essence of a human being really is. So the question that we're all familiar with is, do the clothes make the man? What does that mean to say, or to ask the question, do the clothes make the man?
However you present yourself is who you want people to believe you are.
Yeah, and the presentation has to do with your reputation and how you appear to other people, but it also literally could be clothes, right? Literally your physical possessions, right? You could say it's the distinction between the cover of the book and what's really inside. And the cover of the book includes all one's worldly possessions, including one's body, right? What's the Bible's answer to this question of, do the clothes make the man?
No.
No. And then the question is, what does this story consider really matters about a human being? What makes the man for the Bible? Their what?
Their inner substance.
Yeah, their inner substance. And how, absolutely. So it's the inner person, this immaterial, intangible being, that's what really counts in this story. And it's what Job really does have. I mean, we could find out through the story that he doesn't have it, but it turns out he does. At least I think he does. How does this story define what matters in terms of inner substance? Can we be more specific than just saying inner substance?
So he lost everything, all materialistic thing, but he stayed true to his faith.
Okay, so the word is faith. He maintains his faith with God. Well, let me ask this question. Does Job ever curse God to his face?
No.
No, and it's really interesting because Job finally becomes human when he's tested. He complains to God. He's not happy with God. He asks God, why the heck did you do this to me? But he always comes short. He stops short of cursing God. And therefore, which is another way of saying he always maintains his faith. And this is why God restores everything at the end. And of course, we knew God was going to be right. Remember, God said this guy was perfect to Satan. And Satan says, yeah, I'll prove you wrong. You really think God is going to be proven wrong by Satan? Like, I think not. So the inner being that matters has to do with his faith. So, human nature is this dual natured thing. We have body and soul. Why is that? Because we have the breath of life of God, the soul, and then we're made from the earth. And this story really illustrates this mixture of these two dimensions of the human being that are in conflict with one another. Remember Adam and Eve. When they get married and become, think of it, one flesh, two bodies become one body. What do they become? They become attached to each other. They attach literally to each other's bodies, the flesh, and sex and reproduction and children. And what happens? Their loyalties end up growing in terms of those things, and they lose a certain loyalty to God because there's a tension between loyalty to your worldly possessions versus loyalty to God. And one of the most palpable stories that illustrates this is the sacrifice of Isaac by Abraham, where God literally asks Abraham to sacrifice his own flesh, the thing that you think he would naturally be most loyal to, his own son. He asks him to sacrifice, and he's about to do it up on the mountain. And then an angel comes and basically sends God's message. No, you don't actually have to do it. We were just testing you, right? And you can see the parallel in terms of a test of one's faith in God, that your loyalties, your divided loyalties, God would make you choose between your own son or child, your own flesh, and him, right? That's how, and we see something very similar with Job here. So we've talked about what his substance is. All right, I'm not going to read all this because we don't have time and you don't want me to read it. But this concept of the city of man and the city of God is one that was developed by Saint Augustine in the 4th century AD. And I'm kind of projecting this concept back onto Job because this concept is sitting there in Job, but it's not spoken of in these terms, right? So in the New Testament, in the book of Matthew, Matthew says this, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and render unto God that which is God. Let's start with the easy one. What are you supposed to give God? As a believer, what do you owe God?
Loyalty?
What's the word for that loyalty?
Faith?
Worship, faith, absolutely. What do you give Caesar? You don't give him your worship. Now we're talking about the New Testament as a Christian. Think about it. The ancient Romans worshiped some of their rulers, the emperors, the Caesars, as living gods. The Christians said, they are my political ruler, like my president, basically, but they are not my spiritual ruler, and I do not owe them my faith and my worship, because the God that I worship is up in heaven, not here in Rome. What do you give Caesar instead of your worship if you're a Christian? Anybody know? In the context of this saying, you give him your taxes, right? You give him part of your material wealth, and you follow the laws that the Caesar has laid down. You follow the laws of the political authority. and you do what you're supposed to do as a Roman. But what you don't do is give your faith to Caesar. So St. Augustine writes this famous book called The City of God, right? And in it, he makes a basic distinction between the city of man and the city of God. And this distinction divides up on lines of the basic division of the human being. We're earth and we're the breath of God, which is to say we're body, a material thing, and we're soul, an immaterial thing. So the city of man consists of the realm of the human body. It's the physical city that you live in. And it includes the political authorities. It includes your family. It includes your friends. It includes all the worldly loyalties you have. It includes your wealth and all those things that give you reputation and status within the city of man. The city of God is where, and that's where your body lives. The city of God is the realm that your soul inhabits. And in a sense, the city of God is not like a physical place at all. It's not like a normal city, but it's the realm in which you give your faith and loyalty to God. And as a Christian in this world, you have this fundamental division between your obligation to live in this world and your obligation to maintain faith with the Lord, despite the fact that these two cities represent a conflict of allegiances, a conflict of loyalties, right? And of course, in the city of man is where the outer person lives, and in the city of God is where the inner person resides, right? It's almost like a space of faith within you. So I'll give you one little example. There were these ascetic monks in ancient times, first few centuries, first 500 years after the birth of Christ, in which Christians would actually, they were called stylites. And the Greek word for column is stilo, right? And what they would do is build these columns and then they would live in them apart. And it's actually where we get our expression of the ivory tower, right? And what they would do is live a life apart of the city of man, but they would do it physically. And by physically demonstrating their isolation from the rest of the people, being higher than them, being literally closer to God, they were trying to illustrate that they were to be living in the city of God rather than the city of man. And they would give up all the worldly enjoyments like wealth, family, and things like that, to focus on the loyalty that really mattered, which was their faith in God. And so I have a few other slides here that deal with this issue, but I think in the interest of time, we want to keep moving on here. All right. So Felicia, could you pick up at verse 6?
I think I was at 7, but I
Yeah,
could go.
let's just go back and pick up
Okay.
verse 6.
Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came alone among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered to the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God, and
Escheweth evil.
escheweth evil. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, Thou, Job, fear God for naught.
Okay, doth Job fear God? So notice this. This is very funny. In verse 8, the Lord says unto Satan, Hey, Satan, you've been going to and fro on the earth. Didn't you come across my servant Job, that upright man? didn't you see how awesome, Mike? What is Job to God? What is Job to God?
A slave.
I wouldn't quite, well, you could make an argument to that, but I'm thinking of something a little different. Job is part of God's blank.
Is he a worshiper, a prophet, a servant?
Let me ask this. What did Job do in Genesis? Excuse me, what did God do in Genesis?
Like one of his creations.
Yes. What kind of creator is God? Is he a good or bad creator?
Good.
How good?
Very good.
Very good. Day 6, right? What is the Lord really saying? You see that man down there that I created in my own image? You see how perfect he is? Behold, I'm a good artist. I do good work. There's a certain kind of arrogance on the Lord's part here. And think about it. Job is made to suffer indirectly at the hand of God so that the Lord can prove what a great creator he is to Satan. Is that not a little bit twisted?
Yes, definitely.
Absolutely. So whatever you thought about what God is, when you read the Bible, you realize he has human characteristics. He has psychology like a human being. He even has, dare I say, imperfections. But of course, the reason they look like imperfections is we can't understand how God really works. And this is the best way we can grasp what God is really like, because we can't grasp him because he's beyond our reason, because he's a supernatural being and reason only understands the natural world. So Satan has a sense of humor, and Satan is rebellious and uppity. The Lord asks Satan, have you seen how perfect what he really wants him to say is, yes, I've seen Job and boy, he really is perfect. But instead he asks a question in response to the question he's been given. That's a really kind of sassy thing to do to people when someone asks you a question and you give them back a question in return. And he doesn't ask any question. He says, does Job fear God for nothing? And this is an accusation, not just against Job, but it's an accusation. Remember, he's the accuser and the tempter. This is an accusation against God himself. And this is a kind of pissing contest here. You know, like two guys get together in the locker room and they're shooting their mouth off. Like, oh yeah, you think you're all that? That's kind of what Satan's doing here. In a moment, we're going to unpack what he means by does Job fear God for nothing, because it's not obvious. But to understand it, we have to go forward a little bit more. You want to keep going, Felicia?
Hast not thou made an hedge about him, and about his house, and about all that he has on every side? Thou hast.
Thou hast blessed the work of his hands.
The work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land.
Okay,
But-
great. So you see in this story a kind of echo of the state of Eden and then the fall, right? The work of Job's hands has been blessed, right? And he's living in a kind of state of blissful, I would even say ignorance, because what Satan seems to be suggesting here is that Job is ignorant about what it's like to suffer. Everything, well, I don't want to say anything more than that. And he's kind of living in a Garden of Eden type state. And obviously he's going to be cursed by Satan and made to feel all types of suffering. So you get this kind of parallel to the cycle in Genesis with the Eden to the fall. What does it mean when Satan, so ultimately we want to get at verse 9. What does this thing mean? Does the statement, does Job fear God for nothing? But to do it, we have to see what he says after that. He says, haven't you made a hedge about Job and even about his house and about all that he has on every side? What is he talking about here? And what is this hedge? What is this hedge? What is a literal, so there's a literal and a figurative meaning of this hedge. What is a hedge? He talks about a hedge going around his house and around everything that he has. If we take it literally, what's a hedge?
Literally, it's fence.
Yeah, it's some kind of fence. I mean, I think of bushes, and they act as a fence. Bushes that surround something that essentially insulate it and protect it, right? So this hedge is something that insulates and protects Job. It protects him from what?
Evil.
Yeah, it protects him from anything bad ever happening to him. And there's an impression, I think it was Angelica, what's wrong with Job? I think one of the genuine problems with Job is actually that he's perfect, number one. And number two, his life has been perfect. He's never really experienced any trial and tribulation, right? And why is that? Satan's going to make it very clear why that is. Let me just go to the next one. He says, you've blessed the work of his hands and his substance is increased in the land. Let's put it this way. I think what Satan is really saying. He says, God, you have always blessed the work of Job's hand, and you have always had his substance increase. Job has never suffered once at God's hand. Why is that? Why is that Job has never suffered up to this point?
He didn't deserve it.
Okay, good. I totally agree with you. Let's reformulate that. Job does the right thing in life always. And what happens when he does the right thing?
God watches over him and protect him.
And a little more than that.
He rewarded him.
Yes. What does this whole story hinge on? Good conduct is rewarded, bad conduct is punished, and so on and so forth. Right? What's the problem here Satan is identifying? Job has always done the right thing, and he always gets rewarded by God. Question: why does Job do the right thing?
Because he fears God.
What is Satan's thesis about why Job does the right thing? Implicitly.
Because he hasn't he's basically protected from with God. He hasn't had less.
Okay, so Fahim said it, and we're getting tight on time here. Satan's thesis here is that the only reason Job does the right thing, we'll come back to the fear in a second. The only reason Job does the right thing is, gosh darn it, he keeps getting rewarded in the city of man. Every time he acts like a goody two-shoes, he gets another child. Or every time he does the right thing, he gets an extension built on his house, or he gets more cattle, right? Job has always been rewarded for his good conduct. Therefore, the reason that he's a good man is because he knows he's going to get rewards. And what Satan's whole thesis here, he's a good man for those reasons. And what Job really cares about is those material worlds, those material rewards that exist within the realm of the city of man. Is Satan right about this thesis?
No.
No. Okay, good. Good. Does Job fear? Now let's come back to this question. Does Job fear God for nothing? We already know that Job fears God. Why does he fear God?
He's afraid that he will get punished.
Are you sure? Why does he fear God? Has Job ever been punished?
No.
Well, then what does he have to fear?
I don't think it's really said in the text, is it?
What's not really said?
I don't think he really mentions why he feared him.
Okay, but we're going to infer something from it. I think the story is reasonably clear that Job has never suffered at the hand of God until this age. Satan says it. You've put a hedge around him. You've insulated him from the realities of the world. He never suffers. And yet he fears God. We have to draw some conclusions here to figure out why. Let's put it this way. Does he fear God because God has punished him?
No, because he doesn't.
Because he's never punished him. Yes. So Job's fear, from Satan's point of view, Job fears God for nothing, precisely because he doesn't know what it's like to be punished. What are you afraid of? You're afraid of the punishment, right? But all he gets is rewards. So what does he have really to be afraid of? What is Satan saying? I'm going to give him something to be afraid of. I'm going to let him feel the wrath of what is like a punishment. It's technically a test, but then he's going to have real reason to fear you. He has no reason to fear you because he's never tasted your bite before, right? And implied in this whole statement of does Job fear God for nothing is that the only reason Job is good is because of all the material rewards. I mean, what are we really asking here? If we could go just a couple minutes over, why do people do the right thing? Do they do it for the rewards or do they do it for its own sake? What do people think? Do real people in real life do the right thing because that's the right thing to do, i.e. for its own sake? Or do they do the right thing because they know they're going to get rewards for it? Worldly rewards, rewards in the city of man.
I think a little bit of both. There's some people who will try to do the right thing, and then you have others who just do it because they'll get rewarded.
Okay, good. What does Satan think about human beings? Remember, his accusation against Job is an accusation against all mankind.
That we will just do it to get rewarded.
Yes. And why is that? Why do we do it just to get rewarded? It's a claim about what we really care about. What does Satan think we really care about?
About all the
Ourselves.
material things?
Yes. Implicitly, Satan thinks that deep down, we put on this show, this appearance, we want a reputation for morality. But when you really turn the screws on these human beings, you're going to discover they're not really loyal to you, God. They're loyal to their bling. They're loyal to their stuff. They just make gestures to you so they can keep getting the stuff, right? And so if we come back to why Job fears God, well, first of all, what kind of guy is Job? I mean, I think everybody gets it, but let's state the obvious because that's important for anyone who's like a little not getting this. So why does Job do the right thing? Why does Job do the right thing? Why is he a good man? Because of the rewards or because it's the right thing to do?
Because of the right things
Well,
to do.
yeah.
Because it's the right thing to do. Now, the serious question is, how do we know that?
Because he was taken out everything what he had. But
And what happens? What does he do and not do?
And he still has his faith.
Yes. He loses everything that matters in the city of man. He's a nobody in the city of man. And yet he retains his faith in the Lord because this is the most important thing, the thing of most value to him, more than all his worldly possessions, even his children. Wow. I'm not that good, let me tell you. But the story illustrates the conflict of loyalties here quite clearly. Okay, so there was one last bit. Oh, why does he fear the Lord before he's ever felt the wrath? See, the whole point of why does Job fear God for naught? Satan's answer is yes, he fears God for no good reason, for nothing, because he's never felt God's wrath. And let me give you a taste, him a taste of God's wrath, and he'll have a reason to fear you. Given that he's never faced God's wrath, why does he fear God at the beginning of the story?
His faith can be translated into fear.
Yeah, so fear here is actually an attribute of faith as the Bible understands it. So the reason he fears God is simply because that's what you're supposed to do as a believer. You're supposed to have fear in the Lord. And of course, fear is connected with obedience, and faith is an act of obedience. When you're afraid of somebody, you're obedient to them, at least in this context. Okay, let's just go forward to this other comment, and then we'll call it a night. We could. So there are 2 rounds of suffering, right, that Satan inflicts on Job. There's a first round where he takes things more external to him, and they start closing in from his cattle to his household to his children, and they start converging on him. And then in the second one, he starts harming his physical body, literally his skin. And what does Satan say? Right here at verse 4. And Satan answered the Lord, skin for skin, all that a man has, he will give for his life. So here's skin. You want to save your own skin, and you're willing to risk anything for your life. What is Satan implying Job is willing to risk to save it, or give up to save his own life?
His faith.
Yes. The claim is very clear here again, that what Satan believes that Job and all human beings care about most is numero uno, themselves, their bodies, their worldly belongings. What's Satan implying here? Job will save his skin by giving up his faith first before his life. And does he do that? Of course he doesn't, right? He's not willing to, he stands, you could call him a martyr, right? What is a martyr by definition? Someone who's precisely willing to give up their life, he or she, their life for their own faith, for their own principles, right? And of course, the whole skin for skin here, this metaphor is great, because what has Satan just done? He's literally harmed his own flesh, right? Just prior to this. Okay, it's 9:30. We should call it a night here. Questions, comments, concerns, thoughts before we go?
Professor, I was hoping to speak with you privately after class.
Sure.
So
Anyone
the
else?
midterm is just to be handed in Sunday at before midnight,
Yeah, turn it in.
and then 4 chapters of the Odyssey by Tuesday.
Yes.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Professor, can I show you my book right now?
And Nisha,
Yes, Professor.
let me just find you in here. Got it.
Can you see me, Professor?
I can see you.
All right.
Yep.
Can you see my book?
Yes, I can. Got it.
This one, and then the second one.
And can you show me the other one?
This one.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you. Done.
All right. Thank you, Professor.
Yep. You're very welcome. And Ariba, let me just turn off the record.